What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the Hungover History Podcast, episode 3. Who would have thought we're here for the third episode? Mike here, as always.
Oh, yeah. Got a
RJ. Yeah, definitely fun. A little heavy, like our beers here, but we couldn't find any Vietnamese beers for this episode, unfortunately.
No, Total Wine. Gotta get on that Total Wine. Come on.
Yeah, so we kept it Asian. I just went with my Sapporo, and you got the Taiwanese or Thai, right?
Chang,
nice. Listen, good beer. I want to try some Vietnamese beers because when I was looking them up, they look kind of good.
Yeah, and a lot of the Southeast Asian beers, they're like nice, light pilsners and lagers.
Yeah.
It's not like the crazy European beers you get.
No, they go down easy. So let's talk about why we're talking about Vietnamese beers here, because we're going into the Vietnam sector. We've been playing in the World War II, post-World War II era, and now we're changing it up here. 60s, a little bit
70s.
Yeah. What do we got, Mike? What's the topic?
Yeah, so we're going to be going over something called the Phoenix Program, which was essentially an enhanced interrogation movement that was started originally by the Central Intelligence Agency in like 1964. Now, the interesting thing with Phoenix is they targeted the civilian sector of the Viet Cong. So it was the VCI, the Viet Cong Civilian Infrastructure. So they weren't going after combatants. They were going after teachers, tax collectors, people who were trying to build up the Communist Party in South Vietnam.
It was kind of like a shadow government is what they were calling it, right?
Perfect. Yeah, shadow government that they were trying to destroy and dismantle.
So this sounds like, because it was kind of hard, it's not something that you can find stuff on easily.
Yeah, there's not a lot of
primary
resources. There's not.
There were like a few CIA documents I found, some write-ups like post, like talking about what it was. I don't know if it was a kind of a cleanup job.
Yeah.
And then you sent some good podcasts with who was the guy that we were listening to there?
John Mullins, I think.
Yeah, John Mullins, the Spec Ops guy.
Yeah, he was in McAfee SOG. And the thing with Phoenix is they didn't just use McAfee SOG. It was Army intelligence, the Marine recon units were involved. It was an all-encompassing project that involved multiple branches of the United States military. And also, I was with Linehan last night talking about it.
Yep.
The Australians were involved too.
Oh, really?
I didn't even really know that originally. Yeah, the Australians.
Just sliding in there.
They were involved in Vietnam, but yeah, we were teaching them how to do a lot of this shit.
Interesting.
It's interesting. It is definitely crazy. So some of the basic statistics I have on it: 740 people were captured. The United States says that roughly 26,369 of the civilians were killed. Of those people
killed. I liked how they used, when I looked it up, it said 81,000 were neutralized. Nice and vague. You know.
Yep. But and then the government of South Vietnam said it was closer to like 40. So the
in terms of killed.
Yeah. So the count is totally fluctuated. But either way, it's like 20 to 50% of prisoners did not make it out, which is.
And again, they weren't soldiers. They weren't combatants, which is crazy.
None.
Because I didn't know anything about this when you told me it. I was like, oh, this is going to be like some really bad POW stuff. But no. I had no idea that, And then when you read some of the methods of torture that they used here, not great.
No.
Not good stuff. But essentially, like you said, it was designed to identify, members who were kind of like under the sheets of in these towns, infiltrating that and trying to destroy it from within.
And they were doing stuff like in farming towns, they were diverting like 20% or whatever of their crop to then go spread out to the Viet Cong. There were tax collectors, so they would collect money from farmers and shit to buy supplies. It was a multifaceted operation.
And there's some other like adjacent, because it seemed like it was all pretty interconnected with Vietnam. There's some adjacent programs that they were doing in addition to this, which maybe we can talk about at the end, like the Wandering Soul one and smaller stuff like that, which are interesting. But listen, they were pulling out all the stop. But if you look at Vietnam, they were fighting on foreign ground in really just a crazy environment, right? Jungles, you had like diseases, and we really had no business fighting there. you know?
Yeah, and there's also an entire subculture of different tribes within Vietnam. So one of our greatest allies were the Montagnards, which
Yeah.
they're people from like a mountainous region. I think it's by the border of Cambodia or Laos. So yeah, it was weird. We didn't really understand the culture. We picked up Vietnam from the French, who had
Yes.
previously left it, and it's honestly the French's fault that we even got involved in Vietnam. I was doing
Yeah.
some digging, and apparently after World War II, the French wanted all of their colonies in Africa and Asia returned to them, and we were kind of like, no, why you don't
Mhm.
deserve this. So France threatened to join the Soviet Union if we didn't turn over Vietnam and all
And
their.
what year was this?
This was in like 48, like
Oh,
early.
so this is
50s, yeah.
post World War
This
II.
is
Oh,
during the
wow.
Reconstruction era. Yeah.
Yeah.
So France
Interesting.
fought us, fought the French. They're bad.
Listen, they're not doing much right, especially the Olympics. You
Yeah.
know?
So, oh, dude, don't even activate me. Oh, it's like
Uh,
you got a travesty. All right.
but it
Um,
is interesting though, because John Mullins was talking about that when he was training to go to Vietnam, they were learning French
yep.
because
Yeah,
all the
because a lot of
Vietnamese knew
techniques.
French and it was harder to learn Vietnamese, obviously. So I thought that was interesting.
Insanely interesting.
Yeah.
But yeah, so apparently, at least from what I read, the birth of Phoenix started with the Saigon station chief, who was a guy named Pierre de Silva. So I went into a bit of his background. He was a West Point grad. He was in World War II, and he actually worked for the Manhattan Project doing security.
Hmm.
He was fluent in Russian, and shortly after World War II, he was sent to Moscow doing counter espionage. And he was pretty much in the OSS and slowly formed it into the CIA and helped join the CIA.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so this guy's like a totally interesting background. And he idolized this one French general who wrote a book called where is it? Counterinsurgency Warfare. It was published in 1964. And that was all about the Algerian Civil War. And apparently that book was the blueprints for Phoenix, and then how do you have to disband the civilian network first. It was really, really nutty. And do you know anything about the Algerian Civil War?
No.
It's a fun one. Oof.
Okay. Another episode potentially.
Oh, totally. What about Rhodesia?
Yep.
Yeah, so a lot of it was all anti-communist. And actually, and one of the things I was watching, it was a philosopher interviewing one of the former Phoenix guys, and
Mhm.
a lot of the justification was just morally like, well, we're the good guys, they're the bad guys, they're the con, you know?
Which is kind of, we've been talking a lot, juggling a lot of moral stuff because we were just talking in the last episode about Operation Paperclip and hiring Nazis, and like at what point is winning the war worth breaking your moral compass?
Mhm.
So I definitely get this is probably worse because of the actions that we were physically taking against these people.
Yeah.
But yeah, and you had mentioned that guy, and I read a New York Times article that was connecting the birth of Phoenix to this other guy. So he was a South Vietnamese army officer. I'm gonna butcher his name, but it was Tran Najau Chow, and basically he was big anti-communist in
Yep.
South Vietnam. He got hired to basically go into these provinces and do like a counterinsurgency strategy, and he developed this thing where they were like they would basically conduct one-on-one interviews with everyone in the town, but it didn't mention anything about him doing torture and any of that, like heavy interrogation. And it's interesting because when the CIA incorporated his concepts into the Phoenix program, he was like pretty against it. He said that they failed to kind of emphasize what he had put together, and he didn't support the use of force, which the
Uh,
Americans,
oh, we
sometimes
love
we,
that.
yeah. So clearly, he might have had some good foundational elements, like just simple, like because I think the big thing with torture is people will say anything if you push them hard enough to get out of the
Mhm.
situation, right?
Yeah.
And that's kind of the big issue with that. So they could say anything that's not true, and sometimes these people didn't know anything, which I think is the issue, right?
Yeah. No, like probably close to 30 to 50% of the time they had no clue.
Yeah. And like you said, it's when researching this, it's hard because its legacy is pretty bad.
Mhm.
I would say for the most part, but then you have guys like John Mullins who say that it worked. and that it
Yeah.
was really
No, he
effective.
was. And
Yeah.
John Mullins is just a little background on him. Basic farm rodeo guy from Oklahoma, joined the army in like 1963 before we were fully in Vietnam.
Yep.
He became an army ranger. Then he tried out for MACV-SOG, which was at the start of Vietnam, which I forget what the pronunciation is. I know the V in SOG is Vietnam Special Operations Group. But
Which one?
MACV-SOG.
MACV-SOG. I'll look it up.
But he was early in Vietnam, like in 64. And after his Vietnam service, he went on to do work for the State Department, doing stuff in South America and Central America. He did stuff
Yeah.
in the Middle East.
Yeah, he was
He's
all
like,
over.
yeah, he's the video game Soldier of Fortune from like 2000 is based off of him.
Oh, really?
Yeah. No, he's a
Interesting.
badass guy, but he was fully a bit disillusioned, I guess, for lack of better terms, with what the Phoenix program got done. He would definitely say that it was a success, that it was like a program that should be modeled off. And he kind of, and the point that he was making, he was saying that we still do it, like Guantanamo Bay, Abu
You just
Ghraib in
changed the
Iraq.
name.
Yeah, exactly. So
Yeah.
that was kind of interesting getting his perspective on it. But he never did any of the actual torturing. He was with a unit that would bring people back, and then it would usually be a CIA guy, and
Yeah.
and mainly it was South Vietnamese doing like the worst atrocities. It was usually South Vietnamese getting revenge.
Yeah. Because like you said, a lot of those people that were not Vietnamese but lived in that area hated the Vietnamese.
Totally.
Yeah. So there was a lot of personal grudges there, and we kind of took advantage of that.
Total bloodletting. And it kind of happens a lot. Just like at the start of when we invaded Afghanistan and whatnot, we were giving IR strobes to like farmers and villages, and they would just go throw the strobe on someone's house who they didn't like and say it was Taliban. Then we'd fucking blow it up with a helicopter.
Well, that's the thing. When you kind of insert yourself in these global conflicts, you're inheriting like all the previous conflicts and bad blood that have
generations of like a complex socio-economic political situation.
Yeah, and we were definitely out of our element in Vietnam. But the MACV-SOG stands for Military Assistance Command Vietnam Studies and Observations
That's
Group,
what it was.
which is what he was talking about. Mullins was like, the kind of just this vague name that seems disinteresting, but behind the scenes.
Oh, those guys were nuts. Even just their uniform stuff, they would wear blue jeans. Because
really?
They all their uniforms were handpicked. They carried AK-47s because they would confuse the enemy when they returned fire.
Yeah,
they could grab ammo off them. Really nutty stuff. Because that was the foundation for how our special operators move like today. That was the foreground.
Yeah, and like you said too, they started in '64.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
that's. But I thought it was funny too with John Mullins, how he was talking about that. He bounced around a lot, and then he had kind of just heard about the Phoenix program or knew a guy that was joining it, and was just like, "Hey, I'll do it."
Yep.
And just like little did he know like what that program was. I'm not. He kind of didn't explain whether he knew. It kind of sounded like he knew what was going on, but he wasn't directly the one doing it. So maybe if you are directly doing it, your opinion would change.
Possibly, for sure.
Yeah, I don't know, but he was there. He was there.
I don't know if I saw any interviews of like the actual people who did the torture.
Right.
Because also, why would you even admit that? For all you know, they could have. But yeah, it's really, really.
Yeah.
It's tough to get into just because there's not a lot of stuff written on it. Like, I think it was in 1970. Is that when the New York Times article came out exposing it?
Yes, I believe so.
71?
Yeah. And that's the thing. It's kind of like paperclip. Like, not a lot of people had the public had no idea that was going on. And then a few, I think the paperclip when it came out in the 70s,
this
stuff was going on. So the CIA is not shy about burying this as long as possible. A lot of these things that they did, and for Vietnam, at least with paperclip and stuff, we were talking about, we won the Cold War, we won the space race. Like at least like we got something out of it. For this, it seems like we still lost the war in Vietnam in a lot of ways.
Yeah, they're still one of the only communist countries.
Right. So, But let's talk about a little bit about the torture methods because they're pretty bad.
Yeah,
Uh,
no, horrible
they're
shit.
and so this I got this list from a journalist. His name was Douglas Valentine. I think he was the
Yeah,
one that
Valentine.
broke this, right?
Yeah, he was also
Uh,
just an all-around badass journalist.
yeah, and he said he said central to the Phoenix program is the fact that it targeted civilians, not soldiers.
Hmm.
So here's some torture methods. If you're skeevy, you might want to hear these. But
Mute.
so we have rape, gang rape, rape using eels, snakes or hard objects, and rape followed by murder. So I mean, this is just war crime after war crime.
Yeah, no,
Electric shock rendered by attaching wires to genitals or other sensitive parts of the body, like the tongue. Like, and you just gotta wonder, like, at that point, like, I feel like you're doing it for the wrong reasons. Like, are you really interested in getting information?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was listening to this one this documentary on the Phoenix program that came out in like the 80s.
Mhm.
They were filming some of the Vietnamese people who had been tortured, and one of them was this woman who at the time was like 20, 22.
Oh, the
And she was
fingernails.
yeah, and she was
Yeah.
also beaten so horribly that she couldn't become pregnant. Like she
Oh,
became
jeez.
infertile from being beaten so horribly. So
Yeah.
it's like a lot of those people in that part of the world still hate us. Like her kids are gonna hate us, her grandkids are gonna hate us. It does not matter.
Yeah, I mean, you
Not
can't
that she
blame
have
them,
kids.
especially when, in her case, like she probably wasn't even involved in anything, right?
She did admit to be. She was a one of the educators. She was a communist education specialist. So
But
she
like,
did
what is
like
she gonna give? That's the
exactly. No,
thing.
she's not the one who's dropping bombs or anything. She's educating people on socialism and trying to get them to join the party.
Yeah. No, I think
Yeah.
that was the same woman. If we watched the same video there, where they pulled her nails off, and
Yeah.
then she said it took like 10 years for her nails to grow
Yep.
back after that.
Yeah, oh my god.
Yeah. It's insane. So obviously you can't condone this. You know, at least with some of the other stuff we've talked about with paperclip, we weren't killing people. It was more of just a moral use of people involving with them. But this is bad when you start talking about murder and rape and all that stuff, because war crimes are definitely tricky because you know that they happen. Uh, and I think even now, you know, we heard stuff with Guantanamo Bay, like you said, and some of the stuff we did in Iraq with those POWs. I don't think they were as bad as this, but
Abu Ghraib's pretty crazy.
really, yeah,
Abu Ghraib's wild.
yeah,
But yeah, no, this is actually on a different level. Like fucking rape using snakes. This is insane.
yeah. They had dogs, police dogs, mauling them, beatings with rubber hoses and whips. This one is wild. Prisoners' arms were tied behind their back and the rope looped over a hook on the ceiling, suspending the prisoner in midair. That's, yeah. I mean, they're going to such a degree of effort. It's like, this is really fucked.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, that's the thing is, I wish we had concrete numbers, whether or not this worked, because I'm willing to bet that it really didn't. I'm sure they got a little bit of leeway, but like how much?
Exactly. And it's weird because all this is happening at these, they called them regional interrogation centers.
Mm-hmm.
So it's in these random small cities, some of the major cities, then spread out throughout the countryside of we still have them today. They're called black sites where we set up a prison in a country that doesn't have set laws about torture. And we're like, well, we're doing it here.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
It's wild.
it's change the name, make it vague, and no one will know, type of
Mhm.
thing. Yeah. So we talked about Mullins. He's a good. If anyone wants a little more insight into some of the special ops stuff, that's a good podcast to check out. You were talking about. We can go in accords maybe, because that was kind of the group that was in charge of it, right?
Yeah, so it started where it was directly a CIA project. The CIA was the oversight committee for the
Yeah.
Phoenix program, and it got switched off to Cords, which was created in Viet as a combination of South Vietnamese government and army officials, as well as the U.S. Army, the Navy, the Marine Corps, like a bunch of different departments pushed together. So CORDS, it stood for Civil Operations and Revolutionary Development Support. And on top of that, they also created a peasant army of like 500,000 South Vietnamese villagers. So
Yep.
this was mainly the group of people that was getting the names up from the Phoenix program and collecting people. And another interesting thing they did was the computerization aspect, where Vietnam, that's when we started kind of using computers like a little bit. We were
Right.
taking people's photographs and getting their fingerprints and putting them into a database of
Oh
trying to
wow.
track the Communist Party.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah,
It's probably at the time stuff that only the military had access to.
exactly.
The
Yeah.
police probably weren't even using that.
No, totally. It was only military that had these crazy supercomputers.
Yeah, that's insane. I mean, I'm trying to think because like we said, it's very vague in terms of what they were expressing. Obviously, the CIA doesn't want a lot of this out, so they're going to give you as little as possible into
Yeah.
what this was. There are people who dispute it and say that I've seen people that say that the torture methods that are described are not true.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if
No,
you
yeah,
saw
that's
that,
like that's just a lie. Yeah.
but I mean, they're so descript and stuff that it's hard to not believe them.
Yeah, and there's even the wounds. Like I was looking up, there was a bunch of nonprofits, NGO, charity type organizations in Vietnam after we left that
Yeah.
did all sorts of stuff, working with people who were affected by Agent Orange, working with people who were Phoenix program survivors.
Yeah.
No, and imagine the PTSD you get from that shit.
Oh, imagine like that woman you were talking about. It's a miracle that she's like willing, like, or able to talk about that in an
Yeah.
interview setting. But that, like you said, it's probably just pure rage
Yeah, no,
at what these people did to them.
totally. And I was this is even crazier. So William Colby, he was the head of the CIA from I think 70 to like 74, something like that. So he was in when all of a sudden there were congressional hearings being started against the Phoenix program, where like politicians were finding out like what the fuck.
Mhm.
So it's during these congressional hearings that his daughter finds out about what Phoenix program was. She killed herself through starving
Oh,
herself
wow.
to death after finding out that her father's involvement.
And he was the head of the
He
CIA.
was the head of the CIA, yeah. So he's different from the station chief who ran Saigon, who helped kind of
Right.
start it, along with that South Vietnamese fella. But yeah, it's insane. The suicide rates for Vietnam vets too, just as a whole,
Yeah.
it kind of speaks to that. Where a lot of them, it's weird because a lot of them grew up with parents who fought in World War II, and they had this idea of America.
There's an obligation.
Yeah, it's an obligation of service, and our military would never fight a wrong war. And this was the first real example of an immoral war.
Yeah, I mean, because like we said in previous podcasts, up until World War II, we weren't involved in foreign wars like this. So this was really kind of our introduction.
We did like Spanish America stuff, but yeah, nothing to this scale.
Yeah, but at least that's on our continent and
Yeah,
stuff.
it
Like,
makes somewhat sense.
mhm. But again, it's kind of, and I think we'll talk definitely more about Cold War stuff, but just that total paranoia about the spread of communism, especially in Asia. And like we said, this didn't really stop it at all.
Yeah, well, that's a huge thing with Mullins when he's talking. You can still tell he's one of those old better dead than red kind of guys, where it's like
Yes.
communists are the ultimate enemy, that like they need to die.
Well, and he was talking about one of the other soldiers that he was with, who just literally just hated communists.
But
Yeah.
an interesting thing in Vietnam, a lot of the veterans, I brought up Rhodesia and stuff before, they just went on to go fight against communist insurgencies across the world.
Wherever they were.
Malaysia, Rhodesia, they were just all these soldiers of fortune.
Yeah, and obviously we still have communist nations today, so you got to wonder how much of that was worth it in the end. But I think it's interesting too because there's a bunch of adjacent programs that we had mentioned before that they were doing. Some of them could be their own podcasts entirely. But one of them that was kind of interesting to me was the Operation Wandering Soul. So
what was that one?
Yeah, so this one is where they were making fake like ghost recordings and playing them to the Vietnamese people. So essentially, like the Vietnamese, they believe that people must be buried in their homeland after they died, or their soul will wander aimlessly. And so what the soldiers and CIA people were doing were like recording these things acting as if they're their ancestors and like playing it to like trick them. So we were up to some naughty business on a number of things. So you talk about we had the physical torture, and now we have like that psychological stuff that they were doing.
Yeah. And also, I mean, we would just do stuff like burn down farmers' fields. We would deny the enemy
Yeah.
food. We would assume that they're instantly working together. We would kill their cattle. We would kill, their water buffalo, all sorts of. We did a
Right.
pretty bad job at winning the hearts and minds in that one.
Yeah, because it is interesting though, because we went from the jungle climate of the islands in the Pacific to this, but I feel like this is even crazier than anything like that.
Yeah, the level of jungle that you're in is you can't see more than 20 yards in front of you or something like that.
Yeah, and the diseases is so much worse, and the tactics that they had, the Viet Cong.
Yeah, no, they were
what
smart.
they were doing. Yeah,
Home field advantage.
definitely. But yeah, I'm trying to think to what else there is, on this topic. Obviously, it's probably the worst thing we've talked about yet. I
Yeah,
would say.
definitely.
Definitely not good. War crimes are never good. What do you think?
I mean, it's
got any-
also just interesting how this was kind of the blueprints for how we went on to fight insurgencies for a long
Right.
time. Like after Vietnam, that guy Mullins, he helped start Project Blue Light, which was the beginning of how our army would fight terrorism. Because that's when all of a sudden planes were getting hijacked.
Yeah.
The Israeli Olympic team was shot up in Germany, all these terrorist acts. So that's when you saw a great shift. And it was just a weird time for like the 60s and the 70s, saw such crazy amounts of change with how the military does stuff and how espionage works.
Yep.
Just a crazy time in history.
And it's all kind of due that paranoia, I think.
Yeah, it's all from the Red Scare.
The threat of the nuclear war, like everyone's scrambling to kind of have that upper hand. So they're willing to do whatever they can to do that. But yeah, I think it is interesting because you'd think after something like this comes out that we'd kind of tone it down, but it's kind of just history repeats itself, and we have the same thing like we said in the Middle East with prisoner of war and what we're doing there.
Oh, we did stuff in South America too, with
Yeah.
shutting down different communist dictatorships down there, Noriega.
And it always comes out, it just kind of gets pushed to the side, and not many people hear about it.
Oh, that's when he talked about Taylor Swift or some other bullshit to distract us.
Which is hopefully, if you're listening to this and you didn't know about this stuff, now you do know, and you can kind of go down the rabbit hole.
Yeah, no, never think that the U.S. government's always the good guy. Don't be a bootlicker. We hate
especially in Vietnam. Yeah,
but
I know it.
It's cool though.
If this podcast does one thing, it makes you not trust the CIA.
Yeah, that's the whole goal. We'll eventually do a 9/11 episode.
Oh yeah, JFK maybe.
But I mean, overall with Phoenix, I feel like the big cliff notes was it's crazy how little succinct information there is on it. Like how there's never been a long college peer-reviewed study that's been done on the scope of the Phoenix program. And honestly, it'd be cool to try and find people who are in it, like Mullins, because those guys are getting old now. They're going to eventually start dying out. And I'm not sure how much of it's still classified because they're declassifying stuff every year now.
Well, so like, for example, if I look up the Phoenix program on Google, so you have Wikipedia, obviously, then you have that New York Times article, which isn't really even about the Phoenix program, it's about that South Vietnamese officer who kind of led up to it. And then you have a few CIA documents. You have a book by Douglas Valentine on Amazon. And then not even before the end of the page, it's like, then it goes to like a totally different thing, like a sober, disconnected thing. So I'm like, you don't even have multiple pages of Google dedicated to that.
No, it's very much a underreported and underdocumented aspect of American history.
Yeah, and definitely, maybe if they weren't doing stuff like this now, they'd be more free to share it. But one thing leads to another.
Yeah, then it's like, ooh, who knows? I mean, God knows what we're doing right now in this state of the world. Do you think that we don't have operatives in Ukraine, in like all over in Iran?
100%.
We're always up to some funny stuff.
Yeah. But I think, we kind of asked that question at the end of Paperclip, whether it was a morally justifiable move or not. And I think for Paperclip, we said that it was strategically justifiable, but probably not morally justifiable. But I think
Yeah.
for this one,
It's pretty flat.
it's not justifiable in any regard.
Yes, Sir John Mullins.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which the interview I watched with the psychologist, or I think he was a philosopher, he did a lot of really cool stuff on how vets justified a lot of the war, but a lot of them didn't, and that's why you saw in Vietnam in like the 70s. I think it was 1 in 5 people in prison were a Vietnam vet. Vietnam vets had like a 50% chance of being arrested in their first 6 months home from the war.
Yeah.
Crazy stuff.
Well, I mean, John Mullins too. It's like he's not like a crazy guy. He's pretty lucid. Like he remembers a lot, and I don't doubt that he kind of believes what they were doing was right.
Yeah, he drank the Kool-Aid. I mean, he
Yeah.
was like, this is what we had to do. Those were the bad guys. We were the good guys. If we didn't do that, they would have done something worse.
Yeah, and it's hard to look at it in retrospect and say, "Oh, what if we did it another way?" Because
that'll give him a heart attack.
No, seriously, yeah.
But yeah, the cliff notes on it. Weird that there's not enough sources.
Mm-hmm.
It's weird that it's really not talked about. Definitely not taught. I'd be amazed if any public school was teaching.
How did you first hear about it?
It was a high school class at the prep. And one of my best teachers in high school, he was a Vietnam veteran. He was a Marine tank commander, and I wrote a paper on it in high school just because I was watching one of those YouTube videos of like the 10 worst things we've ever done.
Yeah.
And I was like, what the hell? So yeah, that's originally what got me into it when I was like 17.
Yeah. Yeah, you were the first person who told me about it. But I mean, you kind of know that there's a lot of crazy stuff happened in Vietnam. We've all played Black Ops.
Yeah, seriously.
Yeah. And I think another one, not directly connected, but MK Ultra could be a good future episode too, because that's more something with a lot more information that we could talk about.
No, absolutely. I mean, a lot of just those weird anti-communist espionage, weird.
Like you said, it shows how weird the times were, and it was reflected in the actions of these.
Yeah, and it makes you wonder if you did anything different. How different would stuff be today?
Right, but yeah, man, I don't know. A shorter episode than usual, but like we said, it's because there's so little information on this.
Yeah, it's just really the bad stuff.
Yeah, and if anyone watches this and digs deeper and finds some cool stuff, let us know. But I feel like we kind of covered everything that there is.
Yeah,
because like you said, it's not like Paperclip where we had names of not only the Nazis but the CIA guys that were involved in it. With this one, like we had very few names.
Yeah, like close to none. A lot of it's still blacked out. Yeah, it's just it's not in the open yet.
And maybe in a few years, it'll come out more. Because I know that. So that Paperclip one in 2004, I think a lot of those names started coming out.
Yeah,
so that's it's a long time.
Yeah.
So maybe more stuff will come out eventually.
20 years ago. Jesus.
Yeah, I know, right? Yeah. So, but more than likely, it's going to go to rest without knowing too much more. But I think it's enough to know that it wasn't good.
Yeah, I think that we got that point across.
Yes, but yeah, man, I think we'll stick around this 60s, 70s, the Cold War era, maybe on the next episode or so. I know we got some friends of ours that want to hop on too to talk about stuff. You got your buddy Ethan wants to come on. What topic does he want to talk about? Yeah, I didn't know about that.
You know the Killdozer guy?
No, I don't.
Oh, okay. After this, you should go watch.
Is he a serial killer?
No, not at all.
Okay. All right.
Look him up.
Stay tuned for future episode. Yeah, we get that. I think it could be interesting. We get into some Cold War conflicts.
Yeah,
too. Some of the smaller ones.
One.
Yeah. I know.
A bunch of Vietnam vets, because they were stuck with that mentality of having to fight communism, they went right off to different areas to go do that.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, there's plenty to go. Again, guys, if you're watching, we appreciate it. Comment below if you got any topics you want us to tackle. But yeah, any final thoughts, Mike?
Not really. Sorry it was a shorter one, but like we
Yeah.
said, there isn't so much stuff on it. It's relatively
Oh yeah,
limited.
but hopefully this prompts people to do some more digging. So that'll be
Definitely.
good. But I'll keep looking into it too. Be good. Because even some of those, like that John Mullins interview that you sent me, it doesn't even say Phoenix program in the thumbnail. Like
Yeah.
it's but it's a good
That's a
little
way
snippet of
to
that episode.
get
Yeah.
into it.
Right. But all right. Well, that'll do it for episode 3 of the Hungover History Podcast. We'll be back 2 weeks from now. As always, we're dropping these twice a month. Every 2 weeks, we'll be dropping them. So stay tuned, guys. Have a beer. Dig deeper into the Phoenix program,
Don't trust
the
the
rabbit
government.
hole. Yeah. But we'll see you next time.
All righty. Bye-bye.